this afternoon, we are joined by Rita Pereira from Edge International, who is a family lawyer out in Lisbon, in Portugal. So, Rita, can you tell us a bit about family law in Portugal, and whether expats can divorce in Portugal, and what are the requirements for them to do so?
Hi, Hero. Yes, I mean, family law in Portugal is a little bit different to that in the UK. And some people, namely expats, move to Portugal without sometimes getting proper information on any requirements or any measures they can take just in case they get divorced in Portugal. So legally, in order for the Portuguese courts to be international competent or to have jurisdiction to decide on a divorce of expats or of any other foreign nationals, they need to be habitually resident in Portugal at the time of divorce. Okay, this normally means that they would need to have their normal married life in Portugal for at least 6 months prior to the divorce. Okay, so this is the main requirement. As long as this is satisfied, then they are able to get divorced in Portugal. Now, what is the biggest catch in terms of divorce of expats in specific? Is because, differently to what happens in the UK, in Portugal, we have mandatory property marital regimes, okay? These regimes need to be established at the time of marriage. In Portugal, we have 3 possible property marital regimes, which are the total separation of assets. We have the communion of acquired assets, and then we have the total communion of assets. And these property marital regimes can be chosen by the spouses. If they do not choose, the regime that will apply is the communion of acquired assets, meaning that all assets which are acquired by the spouses after marriage are shared, are common, in that they're shared by divorce or by the effect, by the marriage, sorry. They're shared by the marriage. What is the catch with expats is because you do not have a similar regime, you effectively don't have a regime, and everything in terms of property is dealt with at the time of divorce. What Portugal or the Portuguese system does, similarly to what happens in France or in other European countries, is they will look at how your property is dealt with during marriage. So not at divorce, but during marriage. And the most equivalent that we would have here would be the separation of assets. Because effectively during the time of marriage, so not at divorce, each spouse owns and manages their own assets, or the assets that they own. And so this normally is a problem. Why? Because people come here and they know that if they were divorced in the UK, they would be able to then at divorce, you know, to simplify, normally we say that both spouses have their own assets, and then at divorce, everything kind of gets thrown into the pots and then divided equally. Here, it doesn't happen that way. Because
so if you've got 2 spouses and one has a property in just the name of one of them, will that be then in the pot and divided equally, or is that then considered to be theirs?
That's the problem, because under Portuguese law, 2 expats are considered to be married under the separation of assets. If a property is registered only in one of the spouse's name, it's considered his.
Right. Okay. That's a big difference. And just going back to whether expats can get divorced there, what if just one of the couple is living in Portugal? Would they be able to start divorce proceedings in Portugal, or would the other spouse who's living, say, in England, be able to start the proceedings? If one
of them lives here, they can start the proceedings.
So
that's very common. There's usually a race, what we call the court race, to see who files first. And sometimes you actually have one of the spouses move back to the UK. try to issue first in the UK. And normally the way it works is the wealthiest of the spouses would prefer to be divorced here. Maybe the spouse that is more dependent will try to get divorced in the UK because effectively it's more beneficial.
Yeah, usually. Yeah. So that's the case. So even say one party's here, other parties in Portugal, the party here can petition for divorce in Portugal.
No, they would need to be resident here.
Okay, so both can. Okay, so what about the person who's resident in Portugal? If there's just one, can they petition in Portugal?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's got to be the one who's living. Okay. So what about spousal maintenance? Do the courts in Portugal usually award that? For how long? What does it depend on?
Spousal maintenance in Portugal is also a little bit different to the UK. Courts award spousal maintenance with no doubt, although the amounts of spousal maintenance is very different to the amounts which are practiced in the UK, especially because the awards of the court will always take into consideration the standard of living in Portugal. So they consider the standard of living of the couple which they are looking at or that they are deciding, but they will also look at what is normally awarded by the courts in Portugal. And so this is normally the first big difference. Because people say, oh, you know, if I was in England, the court would award, I don't know how much, and here I'm going to get much less. But unfortunately, that's the way that things work. Then the other difference is that here, there are two main rules. You can only get spousal maintenance if you need it. So you would always need to prove to the court that you need spousal maintenance to live, basically. So, and then spousal maintenance, or the spouse that is required to provide spousal maintenance does not need to maintain the standard of living of the other spouse. Okay. So that's something that's sometimes different. And the law has changed because before it used to be like that. So you would need to maintain some degree of what the spouse was used to, so that there was no big change. That has changed now. So, and the idea behind spousal maintenance is that, yes, you can claim it. You can even claim it after the divorce is decreed, but only if necessary, if you need it to live, and in the exact measure of your needs. Okay, so there is no fixed amount, because you would always need to prove to the courts, look, you know, I have these expenses, I'm not working, or I'm working and I only earn X, and I have my, you know, my expenditure is over and above this, and so I need help. And the court will award it, you need to prove that you cannot cover your own expenses, that those are expenses that are existent and necessary. And you can only claim it for the exact time in which you will need it. So there's no fixed time, because there's an onus on the spouse who is claiming maintenance to find his or her own source of income. So although you may claim spousal maintenance, you cannot just claim forever. And the other spouse can always go back to the courts, even if spousal maintenance is awarded. Let's say if 3, 4, 5 years have passed and the other spouse has done nothing to find a job, or to reduce the expenses, or to find an alternative source of income, then the other spouse may go to the courts and say, look, this needs to be reviewed because my wife or my husband is effectively living, you know, at my expense, or something like that. So in terms of spousal maintenance, just to kind of summarize, yes, the Portuguese courts do award spousal maintenance to the spouse that requests it and that actually needs it. So there's a certain onus of proof on the spouse that's requesting maintenance to prove that he or she needs to receive an extra sum of money to live, to cover her expenses or his expenses. and he or she needs to also take actions in terms of, in the future, even if he or she is awarded spousal maintenance, to try to seek an alternative source of income in order to provide for her own needs.
Yes, it sounds similar to England and Wales, but maybe stricter, and maybe needs considered a bit more closely than they are here.
Mm-hmm.
But the time.
Another difference is, another difference is that here normally spousal maintenance is paid on a monthly basis, so it's not common to have the lump sum, which I know are common in the UK.
If there's enough capital, so they wouldn't award a lump sum, a capitalized maintenance figure.
Yeah, I mean, you can do, as long as both spouses agree.
Yeah.
But if they're not in agreement, a court will not impose that.
Okay, right. So are any assets excluded from the division? Things like inherited assets or things that one of the parties has before?
That kind of brings me back to the marital property regimes, because if you're talking about expats, at least in what Portuguese law is considered, all your assets are separate, because if you're expats married under the English system, your property marital regime is the separation of assets. And so
so it goes back to that. Yeah.
So unless a certain asset is registered in the name of both spouses, in that case we do not consider it communion of assets, as it's not a communion by marriage, it's what we call co-ownership. So you would be co-owners in the same way as you could be a co-owner with your friend or with a relative or with an acquaintance. So it's, and the rules of co-ownership are different to that of the communion by marriage.
Okay. And what about children? How do the courts look at how the children should spend their time when parents separate? Is there a sort of standard arrangement, or
here normally we also do it a little bit different, because everything that has to do with the children is done with the divorce. Okay, although it's separate proceedings, but they run together, so they're attached proceedings. So when a couple decides to get divorced and files proceedings in court and has underage children, automatically we would need to file what we call the regulation of parental responsibilities regarding the children. In terms of what is normal, there are two different regimes which are both common, and it really depends on what the couple intends to do, what is right for their family. So you have cases where custody is attributed to just one parent, and in that case the child or the children live with that parent, and the normal procedure in that case is that the other parent will get visitation on weekends, normally every other weekend. The holidays are normally split. Then it's for the court or for the parents to kind of coordinate or see how they intend to split the holidays, and that's applicable to the Christmas, New Year, school holidays, or normally expenses. When children are living just with one of the parents, the other parent is obliged to pay child maintenance. Okay, this is always treated separately to spousal maintenance. So child maintenance is mandatory by Portuguese law, and to the point where if one of the parents stops paying child maintenance, it's considered a crime. And so it's taken very seriously. There's no fixed amount because it will depend on the child and on the child's needs. So, and also on the level, the financial position of the family.
So it's not just a calculation on the paying parent's income.
No, it's taking into consideration the paying parent's income and the child's needs, because of course, if the child, for example, is going to a public school, or you know, if it's different than a child that maybe goes to a private school, or has or is used to having 5 or 6 different extracurricular activities, or you know, in child maintenance. It's a little bit different to spousal maintenance, because in child maintenance, the idea is to try to disrupt the child's life as little as possible. And so the idea of maintaining the standard, or maintaining what the child is used to, is more considered, because the last thing the courts want is for the child to suffer. And so if the child is used to, you know, having different extracurricular activities, or different activities, or doing traveling, or then the courts will always try to accommodate that, of course, on a reasonable basis.
And what about if one of the parents, for example, wants to move back to England, and the other parent is staying there? Are they likely to be given permission? Is that something the Portuguese courts will consider, and are likely to say, okay, you can go, or will they insist that they stay?
In a case where the moving parent has custody?
I suppose in both cases, if the custody was shared, and if the moving parent had custody.
Well, if custody is shared, it's impossible to have a shared custody where parents are living in different countries. So here there are 2 possibilities. Either the parents work out an agreement whereby the child will need to live with one of them, or if there's no agreement, you know, there's no other alternative other than to get the court's permission. What cannot happen is for one of the parents to move back without either the other parent's permission or the court's permission. And sometimes, and we've had a couple of cases where that has happened. People think, for example, if you're an English national living in Portugal, you think, oh, you know, I'm English and I want to go back to my country. My child is English, and so I see no problem, and I move back. And then all of a sudden it's parental abduction.
Yeah.
And they have, you know, proceedings under the Hague Convention. So this is something that I always warn my clients, you know, no, the courts that have jurisdiction over your child, if you're living in Portugal, it's the Portuguese courts. And if you abduct your child without authorization, Portuguese courts will retain jurisdiction. And so, you know, there's no use in running back to the UK, because
the English courts will
be sent back.
Yeah.
And so these are the difficulties. But as long as parents can, I mean, I always advise my clients to try to do it amicably and try to reach an agreement.
That was my next question, actually. Do you use a lot of alternative dispute resolution? Do you have mediators, family mediators, arbitration, that sort of thing?
There's family mediation. So either you do it via the courts or via, because here if you do an amicable divorce, you can actually get divorced at the civil register. And so you can deal with all the divorce at the civil registry instead of a court, although everything that has to do with the children needs to be approved by the family courts. But in both cases, you have family mediation. So you do have mediators. Although most clients, they normally tend to use more us, lawyers, as mediators in trying to kind of
negotiate a settlement between
negotiating and try to reach an agreement, then the mediation services at the courts or at the civil registry, sometimes even because of a language issue, because these are services in the courts and not all mediators speak fluent English, and a lot is lost in translation, and sometimes expats don't feel comfortable because they don't understand, or the mediator is not understanding their position. Sometimes the fact that a mediator is only knows Portuguese law and is not familiar with English law it creates a difficulty, because they don't understand the client's positions, they don't understand where they're coming from. in why they ask certain questions and why they expect certain things to be in a certain way. And only by understanding the English system can you kind of explain to the client what the differences are.
Because I think people are so used to their own system and how it works that they find it difficult to accept when the courts are looking at things in a very different way. And they find that sometimes.
And if you're, I mean, usually clients, you know, the family work is difficult in that, you know, it plays with a lot of emotions. And you probably know that we as lawyers, we have to be lawyers, we have to be friends, we have to be counselors or therapists, and we do a little bit of everything. And because it's a stressful time for clients, it's a lot of things, a lot of resentments, a lot of things there. And I get a lot of clients saying, but why do things have to be like that? Why did the court decide in this way? You know, in my country, it's not like that. And sometimes I have to say, well,
you're not living there.
So you're getting divorced here. We need to play by our rules. And so, you know, it is sometimes difficult, and our courts work in a different way. And sometimes clients feel more comfortable, and even the mediation that they do, to do it with people that they trust, that know their position, that know what their doubts are and why, and that speak English and that can understand, because that sometimes can be an issue as well.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's really helpful, Rita. Thank you very much for talking to us.
It's my pleasure.
I'll turn the recording off if I can.